Hello everybody, welcome to Crafty Soup. My name is Misty. As part of the design team over at the Counterfeit Kit Challenge, I am here with our final challenge of the month, which will always be to use up the scraps from your kit. So I am running constantly behind these days, and this video was supposed to be out yesterday, and I will just barely get it out today. So without further ado, let's dive in. So I have go-to methods that I do with my scraps periodically. I don't always do this at the end of a kit, but I will keep my scraps in here so that I can work with them as scraps later. So as I start this layout, the first thing I'm going to do is go through the whole papers that I have left, and I really like those two pieces together, so I'm going to save those for a project because it sparked an idea. But I am looking for a piece of paper that can start a story, which usually I start with the photos, but I started with the piece of paper this time. I knew that I wanted to use my scraps to cut out hexagons. Now, one thing I really like to do is cut out circles and cascade circles onto a design. This time I wanted to try a hexagon shape because I bought this hexagon set because I've been very inspired by lots of people out there working with hexagons on their layouts, and I haven't done it. I've had this set around for a while. So that is what I'm setting out to do today. Now, my largest die wasn't big enough to be a placeholder for my photos, so I did use my Cricut to cut out two partial hexagons because I knew I wanted them to flow off the edge of the page at the top and the bottom. So I had this layout design in mind when I got started, which is not always the case. So I am going to pick and choose through these scraps all the pieces that will work for the different sizes of hexagons that I want to cut out. And you'll see a little bit later that even some of these scraps were too small for some of the hexagons that I wanted to cut, but that's okay. I'll show you what I do with that in a bit. Now, the nice thing about physical dies, as opposed to, like the Cricut or something, I can lay out the dies on my layout so that I can start to get a sense of the size that I want, where they're going to be placed, and all of that before I start working. I did that, but then I just went ahead and cut a whole mass of hexagons in the variety of pattern papers that I have. Now, you will see that some of these are partial hexagons, and that's okay because I will end up tucking those ones under and around and between other things. Now, I had this grand idea of pulling out this gold ink pad that I haven't used in a long time and adding more gold because that base pattern paper has some embossed gold polka dots along with the other colors there, and you'll see that a little bit more later. Plus, I had this stencil in my in my kit that I had intended to use through the month, and I haven't touched it. So I thought now would be a good time, especially since the story that I'm telling is about my daughter's 17th birthday that happened to have a snowstorm involved on that day, which has happened once in the past. So I thought trying to add this greenery to this layout kind of mimics, the branches that were hanging with the snow, and kind of how magical we think it is. We like the snow. We don't get it very often. The stenciling was the worst stenciling I have ever done. I don't know what went wrong. Well, I have a few ideas, but I need to play with that ink pad and see if it's the ink pad or my ink dauber, maybe. This might have been done better with a blending brush instead, because the stencil has a lot of nooks and crannies, and I think I was pushing too hard, and that ended up getting the ink to squish under, and I lost a lot of the shape of those branches. At any rate, if you have ever had stenciling challenges, you know how I feel. But I am going to hide the ugliest portions of that terrible stenciling with hexagons. So that is where I start. I take my biggest hexagon and cover up the biggest ugly blob on my layout and continue working from there. Now, I knew I wanted to use a couple of these hexagons with the stripes on them for my journaling. And so I want to get those in place right away. And then because the pattern paper has this teal color up at the top, and one of the patterns in my kit was this very kind of purpley blue. It didn't really match a lot with the teal, so I want to make sure that I pull the teal pattern pieces up to the top to go with that blue so that it looks all intentional and coordinated. So I think when I mix and match the colors that way, this lighter blue does work on this layout. And then it's just a matter of putting bits and pieces together, tucking those cut edges, like I mentioned, so that they make sense, and overlapping bits and pieces here and there so that I get a nice little cascade of elements. And you can see me here working with one of those half hexagons that I cut and hiding that cut edge behind other layers of hexagons and behind the photos and so on and so forth. And I want to make sure I'm balancing out my colors here, and the black was looking a little too clustered, so I wanted to pull some more of the black down a little bit lower. And then I find that I like that just fine, and I'm going to go ahead and glue everything in place. I'm just lifting up the corners of the hexagons and squirting a dab of glue underneath there just to hold everything in place. And if anything seems too loose later on, I will go back and add a little bit more glue, but this keeps everything in place while I move on. Now, I had pulled out a die set with numbers I was just going to simply title my layout with the 17, and then I realized I need to put that 17 in the center of a hexagon. I don't know why I didn't think of this ahead of time, but I'm very glad I thought of it before I finished cutting and laying out. I did cut a little square of fun foam ahead of time to get that 17, and that's going to come back in play a little bit later. So this title adds, it definitely is more noticeable being on a hexagon rather than just a little number. The black helps it stand out a little bit more, and it blends in. It helps make the rest of the black on the layout more cohesive. I didn't want it to just be sitting there all by itself, so I did tuck in a few more hexagons around there to help ground it to everything else. And then I had that extra, the inner parts of the 17, and I played with these for a little bit, and I really wanted to go ahead and put them to use on this layout without it just feeling extraneous. And then I had an idea that if I cut one more set of numbers out of that piece of fun foam that I had originally thought I was going to use, I can put 3 of these in place on my layout with the title being on the hexagon, and that all helps blend everything together, and I use up things that otherwise would have been garbage, and I'm happy with all of that. And then finishing off the layout, I just grabbed some few pieces of leftovers on my table so I can cover up my photos and add a little bit more gold spattering, which also helps to disguise my terrible stenciling a little bit more. All right, that is going to wrap up the layout for this time. I did get my journaling on there off camera, and as I hold it up to the camera, you can see the different elements on here. Now, sometimes I will pop up these shapes onto foam as I go, but this time with the stenciling and the layering of the shapes, I was happy with everything as it was. So I will leave you with a couple of close-ups here as we go. If you want more ideas for using up scraps in interesting ways, I encourage you to join the Counterfeit Kit Challenge group, and I will leave you all the links down below so you can find the information to that. And check out what the design team has to offer. And you know what? The members in our group always have fabulous ideas as well. So head over there and get inspired by what we are sharing. I will be back tomorrow with a fresh month of inspiration, including kit building and layout process videos. Until then, have an artful day.